have him talk to us about composting and, climate change today, and hopefully maybe get some kind of revive some interest on campus on doing some of that. And also, while I'm not going to look at her and embarrass her, his daughter is a first-year student at Alfred University, yay, this year. So they will graduate, she will graduate 30 years after he graduated, right? Whew. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. And
thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. Does this work if I? Can everybody hear me okay? I don't think this broadcasts to the room, just for the Zoom folks. Thanks for spending almost an hour with us this afternoon. It's a thrilling and it's an honor to be back to speak to the Environmental Studies Department and other friends. As Michelle mentioned, many years after I was a student here. And as she also mentioned, I'm with the Town of Bethlehem, New York. It's in Albany County. And I have worked for the Town of Bethlehem for about 13 years, but we just became our own department this spring. And I wanted to point out the beautiful logo there on the left. It was designed by my daughter, so I'm proud of that as well. It's great to be back as not only an Alfred grad, but an Alfred dad now as well. I'm also the Vice President for the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling, otherwise known as NISR3. And NISR3 has a lot of resources for those in the environmental field in any capacity. And we also have a college council, which it would be great to see Alfred join. There are a lot of benefits, networking opportunities, learning opportunities. We have a great annual conference mid-November. This year it's November 14th through 16th in Cooperstown, so not too far away. And there's webinars and all kinds of other resources and opportunities if Alfred decides to join NISR. And even if the university doesn't join as a college council member, individuals, students or faculty can join as members as well and get involved. So today we're going to talk about a few important things. What and how of composting, just going to give a primer because not everybody may be that familiar with composting. Why composting is crucial for the earth, the climate change impacts of composting, and then we're going to bring it back home here. What can we do at Alfred University to make food scraps composting happen again? It has in the past, it's not right now officially, at least to a very large extent. So I like to try to be interactive as much as I can a little bit, mostly going to be talking with you rather than at you, but I'd like to have somebody volunteer. When I say compost or composting, who can tell me one thing? What does that mean to you? Decomposition of organic matter. That's an excellent, brief and excellent definition. The U.S. Composting Council has a longer definition than this, but it breaks down, pun intended, to the controlled decomposition of organic matter to produce a beneficial soil amendment. So organic matter is going to break down on its own, whether we're involved or not, right? Tree falls in the forest, whether we're there to hear it or not, it's going to break down. And that's going to happen with the help of a lot of microbes and macro invertebrates as well. You've got insects, you've got earthworms, you've got all kinds of microscopic and macroscopic critters. You might even have mammals tearing up the log as it's starting to decompose, going after the insects inside. But the point of composting from a human perspective is that we're controlling that process a little bit because we want to first and foremost, probably we want it as an alternative waste disposal method rather than landfilling our organic waste. We can feed the earth with it instead. And we want that beneficial soil amendment or additive for the soil to really help out. So what is compost? It's stable. It's biologically stable for several years after it's done composting. And it's a humus-like material. It's rich in organic matter and beneficial microorganisms that really help the plant's root systems and enrich the soil and strengthen the soil. Compost should really be free of unpleasant odors. A lot of times people think of compost, they think, ew, that smell, all this rotting stuff. That's during the active compost phase. And if you do it properly, if you manage those odors properly, you're not going to really have many odor problems at all. But once it's fully composted, you're not going to see much of that, even a little bit. It's easy to handle. It's friable material, and we can store it for rather long periods. You can store it for at least a couple of years before you start to lose some of the biological benefits of it. It's active living stuff. And it's a valuable soil amendment or a potting soil media amendment. But what it is not, by itself, it's not topsoil. A lot of times, part of my role with the Town of Bethlehem is managing our compost facility, and you're going to see some pictures and learn a little bit more about that later, but in this talk. But part of what we do is we have compost products and we have wood mulch products, but we don't sell topsoil. A lot of times residents will call me or come to me and say, hey, can I get some of that dirt or some of that soil? Compost is the organic, living, biological part of soil. But to be true soil, you don't want to use topsoil by itself to fill a hole in your yard or to be the only growing media. You want to mix that with sand and grit and sometimes clay, depending on what kind of a consistency you're going for, so that you have soil. Those are important parts as well. But this is the organic matter part of it, is the topsoil. Town of Bethlehem sells tens of thousands of cubic yards a year of compost, largely to, homeowners and residents and people in small quantities, but also in large quantities to companies that use it to enrich the soil they're making with these other ingredients that I mentioned. It's not mulch by itself. This is probably a good time for me to hand out. My wife's going to start samples in the back, and I'm going to start samples in the front here. If you don't mind passing these along, probably pretty easy to tell which one's which, but we've got wood mulch and we've got compost. Please take a look and pass it along. Hopefully you'll be able to see the difference. By itself, it's not mulch. Now, does compost have some of the same benefits of mulch? Sure. It can help prevent weeds from growing if you use it as a top dressing or like you would a mulch. It can beautify your landscaping or the area, but it's so much more than mulch because of that biological component. A true wood mulch, which is what the sample I'm passing around, is just made, this for example, is our light wood mulch is made from double ground logs and wood chips. It's just woody material. It doesn't have much biology going on in there, as opposed to the compost. And it's not a fertilizer per se. It can be used in place of a fertilizer, but again, it has so much more benefits than just a regular fertilizer. And of course, it's much better than a chemical fertilizer because it's all organic. And it's not just one product, they're all different types of compost. What can be composted? Who knows one thing that can be composted or is often composted? Sure. Eggshells or other foods. What else can be composted other than food? Yep, grass clippings. What else in that kind of general category can be composted? leaves, yeah, other yard waste, we might categorize it as. There are a couple other things that can be yes? Cotton and linen fabrics. We've got a ringer in the audience here who knows a lot about composting. No, that's good. So food scraps is what we're largely talking about here today. That's the main course of the composting talk, if you don't mind my frequent puns. Soiled paper is another big category of compostables. I don't actually have fabrics on here, but so thanks to my wife, Kristen, for adding that. We've got these types of paper that are not recyclable, but they are compostable. Now, a quick thing about recyclable cardboard and paper versus non-recyclable. If it is recyclable, it's better to recycle it than to compost it. You can compost paper, but it doesn't have the nutrients in it that a lot of the other materials do. It's not really alive anymore. So if it's a choice between recycling versus composting, I would recycle the paper or the lid of the pizza box, even if the bottom is way too greasy to recycle, but you can still compost it. Wooden cutlery is another thing that can be composted easily. Yard trimmings, we talked about yard waste, and there's a whole category of that. And what should not be composted? You can see here in the picture some broken glass bottles, or maybe plastic bottle on the other hand, and a bunch of other garbage. Now, if we're talking about backyard composting versus larger scale municipal or commercial composting, there's some differences. Backyard composting, we generally don't recommend this category of meats, dairies, fats, and oils and bones because they take too long to break down. They can cause some odor issues, and they can attract vermin and critters that you don't really want messing with your compost pile. But in large scale systems like the towns, I'll show you, we can take all of that because we get the temperatures up to be able to compost, and just the way we process it, and the piles are big enough, etc. Pet waste should not be composted either because of the disease vectors potentially in there. Now, the caveat is if you have a vegetarian pet, you can safely compost your rabbit. We have a variety of pets, including a rabbit, and so we can compost the rabbit pellet, which is basically just wood fiber, but you don't want dog and cat waste to be composted in your yard. Too smelly, too many potential disease vectors. Plastic, now there are some truly compostable plastics that can be composted theoretically. I say theoretically because there's a lot of sort of faux compostable plastics out there, and I tend to want to go for the ones that are certified by an organization called BPI, which is an independent third-party certifier. Now, our compost facility and a lot of other compost facilities actually don't accept plastic, even if it's truly compostable, because it takes longer to break down. It can cause contamination issues. It can cause confusion. So how many of you think you can tell the difference between, just at a glance in a pile, between a compostable plastic fork and a not compostable plastic fork with 100% accuracy? Is there anybody who feels like they can do that? No, even I can't, and I've been dealing with it for a while. So just to avoid that contamination on the part of well-meaning people, we tend to avoid the plastics altogether. The only exception we make at our facility is the compostable bag liners, because some of the residents, just the ick factor for composting. That's the price we pay to have them compost the rest of the good stuff that's inside that bag. But the bags that we spec out are truly compostable, and they do break down pretty quickly. In fact, if you've got a really wet compost batch in one of those bags in a hot summer day, it might even start breaking down before it's dumped at our facility. So it's pretty quick. and everything else. Only compost those organic things that you know truly to be compostable and are safe, and don't compost anything else. It sounds simple, but unfortunately there's a lot of confusion, and there can be contamination issues. Contamination issues are kind of the #1 bane of a compost operation. All right, so we've talked about what compost is and what can you compost, but why should we bother? Anybody have one idea? Maybe not the one that's up on the screen. Yeah. That's a good point. Actually, there are some communities that offer weekly recycling and compost green waste pickup, and have switched to every other week for trash pickup, because that's the part that's what we call putrescible, that would rot, break down, and smell, and it really reduces your trash. Excellent answer. Anybody else have ideas about why we should bother? Yeah, Lauren. Excellent. Yeah, the compost itself as a product, lots of good reasons for that. So the one that's up on the screen, of course, is it reduces waste to the landfill. Now, if you look at this pie chart, you see food is 14.6%. Yard trimmings is 13.5%. Those can both be composted, but a big chunk of that paper, 27%, is also compostable, not recyclable. So it amounts to 70 billion pounds of food landfilled in the US annually. That is a lot of pounds. This is information from the EPA. And organics are the single largest category of material that are landfilled right now, and they don't need to be. You know, there's not really a good reason for it. This is a local stat from the capital region where I live. About 30% of the material is either food scraps or what we call SSOW, or source separated organic waste. And you can see the breakdown there of what's food scraps and what's soiled or non-recyclable paper. So 30% of the waste stream is a lot. All right, so it's more fun to listen to other people tell this story than me. So enjoy.
All that time spent nurturing it, and now it's just waste. This is how we heal. Serve their purpose.
In the US, over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food is circulated to compost each year. Imagine if we could work those billions of pounds of landfill into compost. Imagine our cities, vacant lots converted into food forests. Imagine abundance everywhere.
And we can reverse climate change.
But most likely, we lose. Why?
We define waste as capital use, unproductive, or not properly utilized.
But waste is a human condition. We're the only creatures on Earth that don't make zero waste existence.
Yeah, thanks to trillions of microbes that are in and around everything, including us.
Anything that lives gets purpose and contributes to the growth of new life.
Some 500 million years ago, these microbes brought plants onto the land.
The microbes provide minerals, water, and exchange for carbon sugars produced by plants through photosynthesis.
This resulted in a terrestrial explosion of life.
More life meant more solutions, which meant more food and nutrients. And also life, known as a soil food bank.
This increased the abundance and biodiversity of ecosystems and turned barren land into fertile soil.
Today, composting mimics this natural upcycling process, transforming combinations of organic material into high-quality nutrient-rich organic.
Compost isn't just mulch, manure, or food waste on its own, nor does it stink. Compost has the aroma of the forest floor after a rain. It also has superpowers. Compost can enhance food nutrition, increase crop yields, and strengthen plants' immune systems, all while increasing soil's water capacity. And compost stimulates plant growth by bringing microbial adaptations to food soils.
More plant growth takes even more carbon out of the atmosphere. Microbes feed plants. Plants feed microbes, and the self-regenerating soil carbon pump cycles on and on the soil.
Compost is a regenerative substance. It isn't just fertilizer. It's an essential microbial source, a probiotic for the land and the food.
While we make some great progress recycling paper and compost in yard trees, currently in the US, over 50% of trash going to landfills is food scraps, paper, yard trees, and wood, all compostable materials. We are throwing away the very building blocks of life. Only 5% of our food scraps get composted. 5%. That means over 60 billion pounds much of the weight of foreign breaks Egyptian governments. Greenhouse gas at 86 times more potent than CO2. And it's not just good. Grass, leaves, all designed by nature, back to the ground, increase the rush miles to land. That's insane. Some city governments are finally stepping up by make composting more available, but too often they misuse toxic material, trash, stuff we work with. Just stop it, whether toxic or not, that's in that way. Rocks, absolutely carbon and biology. Chemicals leading to more degeneration. We grow regenerative without soil microorganisms, we know it is impossible. Soil without life, it's just dust. If the soil is being stripped of its life-giving qualities, what we save our future, properly made compost. The soil will be spongy and retaining water, restoring our underground water supply. Rural farms producing sterile and more nutritious food and no longer have toxic chemicals. Imagine a farm to table to compost to farm system. This is the regenerative system our future depends on. And doing it at home is easier than you think. Yeah, at home, use your brain bed. Some people don't have a brain bed. Plus one from your city or a neighbor or community garden who can use your compost. Cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and my hometown, New York, are leading the charge. Thank you. Countries from Haiti to Australia are using compost to address food security and desertification. Schools, hospitals, and restaurants are waking up to composting their food scraps. Scientists and compost manufacturers are improving methods, making our superhero even more powerful.
Life isn't over for no people. Along with organic material, it can help restore fertility to our soil, regenerate our food systems, clean our water.
And it can help reverse climate change. Really?
Okay, so what can you do? Do all support compost. We keep the habits. Human beings must participate in generation. Each person play a role to help regenerate our planet simply by composting.
The cycle of this can make or break us. We can see.
So what do you think? Are you inspired by the compost story there? That was a very informative, in my opinion, video that was put together by the folks at Kiss the Ground, which is an amazing documentary. It's available, I believe, on Netflix still. You can purchase it for $1 or something on Vimeo. I highly recommend everybody watch Kiss the Ground. It's narrated by Woody Harrelson. Got a bunch of stars that you saw some of them in it, but a bunch of everyday people as well. And it tells more the complete story. It's a documentary, but it's really kind of captivating. So I hope that they were able to teach you in that short video some of the things that we're now going to review as well to make sure that we actually retain them. So why compost? Another important reason is because of the greenhouse gas emission reduction and the pollution prevention. As the gentleman in the video said, organic waste decomposing in an anaerobic or without oxygen environment of a landfill breaks down slowly. It's not going to be the way we do it with an aerobic process with composting, where it's quickly and controlled manner broken down into compost, becomes part of the short-term carbon cycle. Rather, it takes over many decades, is going to produce methane. And as they said, it can be up to 86 more times potent than the greenhouse gas, than carbon dioxide. So very powerful contributor to climate change. And if we get all of those food scraps out of the landfill, it's going to have a huge impact on climate change. Food waste accounts for maybe 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to say that one more time. 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions are just because of food waste in landfills. And composting is going to convert that organic material into the stable carbon, as I mentioned, part of the carbon cycle. And compost itself also helps retain water and nutrients of the original biological waste. More on the same topic. Biggest climate change benefit of composting is the avoided production of methane, as we mentioned. I need to go actually back to this last slide for just a second. This graphic here reminds me, right now is actually till the end of the week is actually climate week. So it's a good time for this talk. New York City, in conjunction with the United Nations General Assembly, and throughout the world, there are over 500 events this week focused on climate change and how to stop that. So it's an important week to focus your thoughts and attention on how we can really help with the problem. And that's one of the reasons I love composting, because it's simple and everybody can do it. You don't have to compost in your own backyard. You can simply divert your food scraps and yard waste if you have that opportunity, if you have a yard with grass clippings and leaves, from the landfill. And that's a big step that everybody can take. That, along with your own personal transportation choices and energy use, are the biggest steps that we can take as consumers easily, as people, rather than policymakers, or if you're involved with government or large corporations, you can take other actions as well. But everyday people can, that's the easiest thing we can do towards helping with climate change. Just reiterating some of the facts from the video about the numerous benefits of compost. The food scraps disposed of in New York State could divert approximately 500,000 cars from the road. That's that equivalent reduction of greenhouse gases. That's in New York State alone. 500,000 cars, equivalent pollution prevention. And a national stat from way back in 2005, it's probably gone up by quite a bit, but 7.8 million cars from the road for the country. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. How many people have heard of CLCPA? Nobody? Okay, well, I'm glad I'm mentioning it then. New York State is, along with California, is actually leading the nation in statewide climate change policy. And it's a new law that was passed last year, I believe, but it's still being implemented. They're formulating the policy this year and going to actually be actively implementing it next year. But here's a little bit from that. It's just my alarm that I have a certain number of minutes left. 40% reduction in emissions by 2030 is a big goal from the CLCPA. 85% below 1990 levels by 2050. So it's a little bit of ways out, but that's a huge goal. And commitments to making that a just transition with regards to climate justice, rather than trying to foist facilities off on poor areas and so forth. So if you take a look at here, the current estimated GHG emissions by sector on this graphic, you can see the orange landfills and waste category is a big piece of that pie. That's what we're talking about today, as well as some of the other categories, because if you think about it, if you're sending a lot less trash by weight to landfills, then it's going to be reduced emissions from the vehicles, and a lot of the other categories are going to be affected as well. So how does this relate to organics specifically? They really are focusing on methane because of its potency as a greenhouse gas. We call the methane leakage. You may be familiar with the fact that some landfills have equipment to capture a piping system and et cetera to capture methane and reuse it. A lot of landfills don't, but even the ones that do, the fugitive emissions, the ones that escape this leakage, account for a huge amount of the climate change impact. This is going to be a slow, we're realizing the changes, the impacts over periods of decades because of the way that methane works in the atmosphere and in the landfill. But it's important to start right away. So there's some recommendations right now. As I said, they're formulating the policy this year, finishing up with that, on how to amend the food donation and food scraps recycling law, which was passed last year, and it went into implementation. I'm sorry, it was passed in 2019, but was actually implemented for the first time this year because of COVID delays, which requires all large producers. So we're talking about large grocery store chains, really big restaurants, colleges and universities, et cetera, that produce more than 2 tons per week on average throughout the year of food scraps, to donate any edible food first and foremost, and then anything that's not edible needs to be composted or sent to an anaerobic digester if either of those types of facilities exist within 25 miles of the area. So it's a big deal for New York State, but we're already talking about some amendments to it based on this scoping plan. A little bit more about why compost. I'm going to kind of breeze through this because the video and some of what I've already mentioned touched on this, but it really has magical properties for the soil, helping with the roots and helping with the plants and preventing diseases and working as a biofilter, and just really amazing stuff. A little bit of a quick primer on how to compost in case anybody is inspired when they leave here to help with the effort. We talk about greens and browns. Browns are usually the leaves. That's the easiest thing to work with. And there's some other things in the category. And the greens are the active living nitrogen heavy stuff, the food scraps, the lawn clippings. This is a poster. It was developed by one of my friends over at DEC that shows visually the browns and the greens, and you've got the storage there for the leaves made with, you can make that with pallets as an easy storage in your backyard next to your composter. And you want to have that right balance. They say 3 to 1 or more browns to greens ratio. And You can see little things like no cat or dog droppings, no meat or dairy, like I mentioned. But this totally, is an easy way to summarize it. A little phrase up at the top: making compost takes some care. Add greens, browns, water, and air. It's really the only 4 ingredients you need to compost. Needs to be aerobic, as I mentioned, so you need oxygen. You need some water, but food scraps are wet enough just by themselves most of the time, or you can have rain do its thing and snow. And then the greens and the browns, the carbon and nitrogen mix. There are some differences, as I mentioned before, about backyard composting in the one picture versus a large scale municipal composting. That's a picture of the Onondaga County facility. And this is the Town of Bethlehem facility. These windrows, we call them, in the back there are all vacuum collected leaves. We also have larger windrows, much taller and wider, that are mixed yard waste. And we also have food scraps now as well. You can see some residents happily shoveling the compost to bring home with them. And that yellow piece of machinery is a screen machine. This talks a little bit about our food scraps composting program. We've been doing yard waste composting for over 23 years. And then we decided back in 2018, we really need to focus on food scraps as well. So we have backyard composting education resources. There's now curbside service available by a private hauler. And we're also composting from private haulers at our facility. And in the spring of next year, it should be 2023, not 2033, we will have drop spots available too for the folks who don't want to do it in their backyard, but also don't really have the means to or interest in paying somebody as a hauler for the curbside service. This is our facility. It's called aerated static pile method we're using now, with a blower motor and a timer to force air through perforated pipes from the base of the pile. It can take the process that would be 9 months or more down to 90 days or less, because you don't require turning the pile. You don't have odor release issues. And also you can control the timing of the air. It's usually just a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes out of every 20 or 30 minutes. So a few minutes out of every hour that we're putting the air through it. Most of the time it's just doing its thing and the microbes are doing their thing. All right, so let's talk about composting at AU. So in the early 2000s, there was a ENS student, Seth Logan, who worked with the university there's a picture there of a pulper. That's not the actual pulper, but it's probably similar. They started using a pulper for the pre-consumer waste, the kitchen scraps, organic waste, to pulp everything. And then took it to there's a picture of the equestrian center. You can see some compost piles for manure probably in that aerial photo, but they were composting there. And the environmental house, as Michele mentioned, I got to have the privilege of being one of the very first students that lived there, and along with some other fellow students, and Michele's guidance, we got the environmental house started in 94 and 95 when I was a student here is when it started. But they have a greenhouse there, and I know there's still a little composting that's happening actually in the greenhouse right there. But it used to be more the official food scraps from the dining services. And they also tried some post-consumer rather, but as I mentioned, there can be some confusion, some contamination issues with that compared to the peelings and the kitchen scraps. The picture of the dining hall used to be about, it's actually 7 tons a year. I think Michele was confirming that we were doing at the height of the program. So a good amount of composting. Unfortunately, it's no longer happening. One of the problems with composting on campus is you get some students that are really enthusiastic about it, and then they graduate. So one of my goals here is to inspire students and faculty to get involved, but also we're going to lobby the university administration to try to make sure that is a permanent part of somebody's job description to coordinate So that doesn't go away when the students that are very active and passionate about it graduate. It's not going to be a heavy lift, pun intended, for those who want to participate, because the physical plant's most likely going to make a vehicle available again to transport it. We're talking about 5-gallon pails or wheeled carts, depending on the volume of composting. And the university will provide, or I will even help out with providing that. Can even reuse things like pickle buckets from the dining services. So you have an opportunity as students and the faculty that are here today to really make an impact. As I hope we've demonstrated earlier in the talk, climate change and soil restoration and human and environmental health. So they are across the hill. They are doing composting still. There's a picture of one of their students dumping a 5-gallon pail and a thermometer. I should mention a little bit more about the heat involved. You want to get compost, the microbes work best in their 90 to 120 range, but you want to get it up to above 131 degrees Fahrenheit for a little while at least. If you have a small scale system like this, it's not necessary, but for a big municipal facility, we're actually required to keep it up 131 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Compost is hot stuff. It's the microbes respiration that's giving off this heat, and it can quickly heat up to 150, 160, 170 if we're not careful with that. We turn the pile or add more air if in the case of the aerated static pile. Anyway, they're collecting their kitchen prep waste and also the leftover salad bar or veggies that would otherwise be. Do you have a question? Oh, wonderful. Do you happen to know where the food scraps that are going in there are coming from? So about yay big, maybe? Nice. Well, I thank you for mentioning that. I wasn't aware of that, but that's great. That is an option, it sounds like, for students to be able to use those right now. Currently, Alfred State, they're doing a couple of 5-gallon buckets a day, weekdays. They transport it to the farm, the Alfred State's farm. It's about a mile away, I understand, from their dining hall, and where they have a 4-bin system. You can kind of see it here in the picture. 3-bin system is often pretty common. Their 4-bin system allows to have some brown storage as well, like the leaves. They layer leaves from the village, they get from Alfred Village when they do their leaf collection in the fall, and they get to use that. Now, Jessica Hutchinson with Alfred State said, I can happily share her contact information, which I'm doing. She welcomes collaboration with AU, including they will willingly accept our food scraps if we just have a system to send to transport them over there. You know, they're not going to come pick them up for us, but if some students or faculty are willing to work with dining services, and I'm available as a resource as well as other folks. So let's get involved here. As I said, she welcomes collaboration, including accepting AU's food scraps, the pre-consumer stuff or the salad bar waste, not the after, post-consumer after folks have left food on their plates and mixed up with other things, at least at this point. So who's ready to help get started? Anybody inspired to do some composting on campus? Yes? And we've got 1, we got 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Let's please make sure take one of my cards and maybe we can chat afterwards, and make sure Michele can loop us together, because I'd love to help out. Here's some resources. I mentioned NICE R3, organization that I serve on the board for. statewide organization of recycling composting professionals. This Compost Awareness Week, I know it says 2020, it's the same link, but it's been updated each year since then as well. Has a lot of great resources on that page. A couple of them are fun videos, including the one under virtual, first one under virtual is with the Town of Bethlehem's facility, and yours truly on May the 4th, making some ridiculous Star Wars compost puns. And then there's a couple of Town of Bethlehem pages as well for more information, and some other resources also. And my thanks go out to Michele above and beyond, my mentor here for environmental studies when I was a student, the advisor for the environmental house, making that happen, inviting me back for talks and everything else she does, as well as some folks at DC and the Town of Bethlehem. We've got time, a couple of minutes here for questions. Anybody have any burning questions? I'll be available afterwards out in the hall or outside. Does anybody have any burning questions right now you really want to know about compost? Lori.
So one way base system,
Yeah.
so that metal frame, once everything kind of goes in, because it's an open system, that's not the air, or you still have to kind of try to mix that outside.
It's best if you can use a pitchfork or somehow turn it. Now, if you design the 3-bin system with large enough openings, Alfred State didn't think to do this until after the fact. You can use a skid steer or a small piece of or tractor or something to actually turn that. But otherwise, you can use a pitchfork, or they make it home system. You can do the lazy method that I do in my backyard. I do professional composting by day, but in our backyard, we just do the lasagna method, which is layering the leaves, and we rarely turn it. Occasionally we do, and that helps. If you can do it, the more you turn it within reason, the faster it's going to break down. But if you're doing it mostly to avoid waste disposal, and you don't really want compost super fast, you don't have to turn it that often. You just want to make the greens and browns mix, and cover the food scraps with lots of leaves, and you're good to go. Thank you, everybody, very much. Appreciate joining us. And like I said, I'll be available outside in the hall. I know there's a class in about 10 minutes in here, so thank you.